I call Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much. Mr Speaker, we heard a lot of stats there, but it reminds me of a great quote, that Speaker uses stats like a drunken man uses a lamppost, for support, not illumination. Mr Speaker, there was a very interesting answer that John Key gave in... thanks for that, mate. There was a very interesting answer that John Key gave in question time today to a question that was asked, I think, by Andrew Little. He talked about the number of overseas investors buying houses in New Zealand. And Mr Key said, "You don't know that fact, no one knows." And you know what? He is dead right. And that is the problem we have got. No one knows how many foreigners are buying houses in New Zealand. Nobody knows the impact that foreigners are having on the Auckland housing market. So when John Key and Bill English come out and say they are now going to require overseas investors to have IRD numbers and bank accounts, what I would like to know is how they are going to police that. Now, the reason I bring this up, Mr Speaker, is because one of my portfolios is land information. Land information is responsible for overseeing the Overseas Investment Act. And the Overseas Investment Act is about making sure that those who come in and buy sensitive New Zealand assets or sensitive New Zealand land go through the right process. Now, looking through the budget, I made an assumption, I could be wrong here, I made an assumption it would be the Overseas Investment Act that would be in charge of monitoring foreigners buying houses into New Zealand. And the problem we've got at the moment, Mr Speaker, is that the Overseas Investment Office is way behind in consents. Technically, Mr Speaker, they have to have a consent approved or a sale and purchase agreement signed off within 65 days of signing that if it requires Overseas Investment Office consent. Now, technically, there's a whole lot of sale and purchase agreements now in place with foreign investors that are redundant, that have fallen by the wayside because the Overseas Investment Office has not got the staff to monitor this consent process. And if they are going to be asked to monitor this new process, and I for the life of me couldn't figure out who else would do it, then I do not know where they're going to get the resources for it, because there is not a cent extra in the budget for this at all, certainly not under Land Information or the Overseas Investment Office. Mr Speaker, one thing I would like to talk about is I'm a provincial MP. Now, I get a little bit sick and tired of hearing people say that the provinces are failing, because, as you know yourself, the provinces aren't failing. In fact, there are some fantastic stories of businesses that are doing incredibly well out of the provinces, and certainly a whole number in my electorate of Napier. But, Mr Speaker, they could be doing a lot better. And my firm belief is that if we are to maximise economic development in the regions, it has to be a partnership between local government, central government and key stakeholders. So what I was looking for in this budget, and what I would have really liked to have seen, and Mr Speaker, if I was writing this budget, what I would have put in it is a commitment to regional economic development. Mr Speaker, what I would have done if I was the Minister of Finance is I would have set aside a decent chunk of money, let's say $500 million, and I would have sent a very clear message to the regional economic development agencies and the regions as a whole that you come to us with plans around what you would like to see in the regions, around where you see benefit being generated, around how the government can partner with the regions, and we will help you out. Now, Mr Speaker, I'm the first to admit that we cannot expect the government to throw money in the air at the regions and watch it settle and hope it settles in the right place. That is not how governments spend money. But what we do need to see, Mr Speaker, is a commitment to the regions. Now, by that, I do not mean money thrown willy-nilly in an irresponsible way. But what I do mean is a commitment to partner with those who make a difference in provincial New Zealand. And this is not what we have seen at the moment. And Mr Speaker, I would suggest that one way to deal with the booming Auckland housing market at the moment is to give businesses a reason, an economic imperative to move out of Auckland. Not all businesses, but certain types of businesses move out of Auckland and to the regions. Let me give you one example. We know We know how much money it costs to bring a 40-foot container or a 20-foot container across the Port of Auckland, how much it costs to transport that container from the port to a warehouse, and how much it costs to warehouse it and then distribute it around the country. It is about 40% more than to do that sort of operation in Napier, where we have one of the most efficient ports in the country. Even Mr Foss will agree with me on that point. So, Mr Speaker, there is a very, very compelling business case for a number of these businesses to move out of Auckland and to the regions. But what we do need is a real partnership between central government and local government. And that will only come, Mr Speaker, when central government sends the right signals to provincial New Zealand, and those signals were not sent in this budget. It would have been easy to do. And Mr Speaker, I wonder what the provincial MPs in this National Caucus were saying to Bill English when he was putting the budget together. I suspect they weren't saying much because they didn't know what he was planning. Exactly. They had no idea what he was actually planning. But I would have thought, and certainly as a provincial MP, as a number of my colleagues here are, the message we will send very clear to our party, and as a result of that, I think the policy that you will see that we take into the next election is one of regional economic development and regional economic engagement. And Mr Speaker, on that, one of my portfolios is actually forestry. What the government did announce in this budget is $5 million to spend over 3 years, to spend on research into alternative species. Now, Mr Speaker, that's very, I'm not going to knock that because it's, it's quite an important project, that there's no doubt, but it doesn't deal with the fundamental issue we're facing in the forestry sector at this point in time. Mr Speaker, in the last 10 years, we've gone from 6,000 cubic metres, or 30% of the amount of logs cut, to 6 million cubic metres, or 30% of the logs cut, to 17 million cubic metres, or 56% of all logs cut have gone across our wharf without a single cent of value being added. Without a cent of value being added. And part of the problem we've got here is a lack of money going into regional economic development and especially into the wood processing sector. In fact, one of the great policies Labor came out with and went into the 2014 election with is accelerated depreciation for those who wanted to invest in timber processing facilities. It was a fantastic policy, and the resonance that gained in the processing sector was enormous. And in fact, again, I would have thought that would have been something that this government signalled in the budget, because it was a great policy that resonated right across the industry. But we've got to do something about this, Mr Speaker. In fact, well, to be honest, Mr Speaker, we might need sawmills in the near future, and the reason I say that is the size of the planted estate has dropped by 76,000 hectares over the last 10 years. This is an industry in decline, and yet this is the only industry that is going to get us out of the problems we face with our carbon emissions and our global responsibilities as a clean, green, 100% pure, branded country that allows us, that gives us a global competitive advantage. But the sawmilling sector, the forestry sector, really is suffering under this government, Mr Speaker. And as a man from the provinces that have a number of plantation forests, I know that you yourself must be a little frustrated with this.
Don't bring me into the debate.
I'm sorry, Mr Speaker, but I get passionate about the regions, and I know you are as well, so I do apologise.
Don't do it again.
There's been around 6,000 jobs lost in this whole industry. So, Mr Speaker, I would like to conclude by saying three things. First and foremost, what a government needs to do, but what this government really needs to do is start engaging with provincial New Zealand and go out to them with a plan, with an action plan, even if they go out to provincial New Zealand and say, this is what we would like to see from you. But there needs to be a level of engagement that just is not happening at the moment. The second point I would like to make, Mr Speaker, is that the forest sector is a very important sector for a whole raft of reasons. First of all, it can transform commodity logs into specialty products. Secondly, it employs a whole lot of people in the regions where there is high unemployment. And thirdly, it will actually help us meet our Kyoto or our Paris commitments under the emissions trading scheme. And the third point I would like to make, Mr. Speaker, is we really do need to get a handle on who is buying our assets in this country. We really do. It is not a difficult thing to do. In fact, it would be quite cheap to do. We would support it if it was done in a way that was meaningful. So I think as parliamentarians, we need to work together to provide New Zealanders with information around who is buying our houses, how much they're paying, where they're buying, and what they're doing when they do buy. Thank you very much.